Hello, beautiful. I'm your host, Nicole Goff. Welcome to the Ecstatic Life Podcast, the podcast for women who want it all: health, wealth, freedom, authenticity, love, beauty, all of the hidden gems just waiting to be uncovered. This is the podcast for women who are ready to discover their inner creatrix, to discover their inner manifester, and who want to find the ecstatic in every day. Hello, beautiful. Welcome back to the Ecstatic Life Podcast. If this is your first time here, I am host Nicole Goff, and I am a holistic life coach. I am a homesteading mama of 5, and I guide crunchy, overwhelmed moms who are ready to reclaim their identity beyond wife and mother. This podcast is all about practices, modalities, and lifestyles that can make your life more ecstatic and bring more joy into your motherhood journey. So today I would like to talk about conflict, specifically repair, healing conflict. And one of the ways that I would like to teach you to do this is through something called co-regulation. So, because conflict happens, we are human. Sometimes we are just cranky. We have differing opinions from our primary partners, our husbands, our family members, our kids. And when these conflicts inevitably come up, it's really important to have a toolkit for repair, coming back together, bridging and healing rather than letting that damage sit and simmer and create distance. So repair is all about bridging those gaps and building healthy, secure attachment. And this can look a lot of different ways, but the main point is to come back together and hopefully to actually grow from that conflict. Because when fights happen, it doesn't have to be an end all. It's not a win-lose zero-sum game. It can actually be a chance to make those relationships stronger and healthier and to find more understanding in that dynamic. And so just to share like a short story of what this could look like, I have posted about this particular conflict in my social media. There was a morning that my husband decided to get up and cook me breakfast on a Saturday morning, and he made me eggs. And I'm sure he was very proud of himself for serving me breakfast. And he serves me this plate of eggs and they're all ready. And we've been together for 13 years. And for 13 years, I have been telling him that I hate runny eggs. I like my eggs fried hard, cooked all the way through, no goopy things in them at all. And so what do? He hands me this plate. I made a disgust face and I was like, ew, like, in my mind, I'm thinking, you should know me. You've been having breakfast with me for over a decade. You should know how I want my eggs cooked. And so that rejection really hurt his feelings. And he takes the plate back and he says, don't worry, I won't ever cook you eggs again. And this is just one of those examples of something where both people get triggered. And it's kind of a silly example, which is why I posted about the whole thing on social media. But rather than handling it very well in that moment, both of us got triggered and picked on each other, basically. But not long after that, 15 minutes or something, when we had both cooled down from our upset at each other, we came back together and I was like, hey, I'm sorry for that reaction. And he's like, yeah, I'm sorry for that reaction too. And I was like, this is actually how I like my eggs cooked. I really appreciate that you took this time and effort, and sorry for being a jerk. And he's like, yeah, sorry for being a jerk. I'll remember for next time. And that's repair. That's just a very simple, poignant example of what that can look like, rather than in the past simmering over it, getting all deep into my feelings and thinking, oh my gosh, this guy doesn't know me. Like, he should know me after 13 years. He should know how I want my eggs cooked. And taking it as this big thing in our relationship and turning it into something huge. Or him thinking, oh my gosh, she is so unappreciative. Every time I try to do something for her, she criticizes me and nags me. And, both of us simmering over that for the rest of the day and it causing a big, gap to widen in our relationship, which in the past has happened many times over things that are simple and silly like that, or over bigger problems too. But instead, because we've been doing this work on repair and on regulating our own nervous systems and coming together, we were able to laugh about it and say, hey, that was a really stupid fight, and then make a video about it for social media. So conflict is inevitable, but damage is not. And like I said, you can take those conflicts and actually turn them into growth and turn them into a learning opportunity to learn more about your partner or learn more about your children or your friendships, to learn more about those relationships, to learn more about the other party, and to actually build and bolster your relationship, to have more understanding afterwards. And ultimately, this kind of repair builds secure attachment and safety in relationships. And that is really, really poignant when we're talking about our children. So you can see this in action with kids so easily. When a toddler is mid meltdown and you get frustrated and you walk away from them and you abandon them, they tend to spiral, right? They spiral and they get worse in it. It becomes this huge blow up thing. Whereas if you go to your toddler and you just sit next to them and you put your hand on them and you're there for them without judging, without criticizing, without trying to manage their feelings, they move through it. And you can see this with young kids. You can see the arc of emotions, the arc of the upset. And as they come out of it and come down, and then you can give them a hug and you can talk about it when they're in a state where they can speak about it again. And with toddlers, these things can be such like micro moments, micro teaching moments, because they do just happen so fast. And it tends to be with our adult relationships. These things can be more long and drawn out. And even like I was saying with my husband before, sometimes little things like that would turn into like a 3-day fight, which is like ridiculous. Stonewalling or ignoring each other, being passive aggressive for days because of a silly little conflict. So repair is super powerful and super necessary. And like I said, this is building secure attachment in these most important relationships in our lives. And like with that example with your toddler, you can build the repair into it without the other person being a willing participant even. They don't have to be fully engaged. If you're talking about with your kids, you can do the work on your side, and it is building that secure attachment and building that foundation for your relationship to be a safe space. One of the most important mindset shifts when you're thinking about going into repair is to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. And this is to look at the other party and to know that they aren't malicious. Like most people aren't malicious. And most of the time, the person that you are having the conflict with, they are acting from old wounds. They are acting on programming that was put in them in their childhood. They're not meaning to hurt you. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have when we go into conflict is we get into this zero-sum game, me against them, winner loser mentality. And when you can get out of that competition mindset and you can step back and see that most likely the other person that you are dealing with is a loving, kind, well-intentioned person. And if it is someone that you are married to or your children or, one of your best friends or your parents, most likely you are dealing with someone who is a well-intentioned, good, kind, loving person. And to see them that way and to remember that, because it's so easy to fall into that trap of painting the other party as the enemy. And this has really been programmed into us through media, just, our socialization, the way we're grown up, the way that we have been talked to and treated as kids. This is very common to see things as a competition and to see conflict as a winner versus a loser. And everybody wants to be a winner. Everybody wants to be the good guy. And in order to be the good guy, you have to paint the other party as the bad guy. So if you can shift your mindset around that and start to get curious and start to try to recognize trauma patterns that are coming up, try to recognize programming that is coming up, rather than looking at it as a competition that you need to win, a fight that you need to be victorious in, and drop your ego, good guy, bad guy story, your ego's obsession with being right. You will go into these things with so much more clarity and so much more ability to stay calm and to stay above it. One of the things that I say a lot to myself and out loud in conflict is that you can be right and still be an asshole. So it's important to remember that being right is not the end all be all. It is not the goal. The goal is the healing and the repair. And so to drop that ego and to remember that there are subjective truths. Both sides can be right. And what's more important is coming to that understanding rather than being the winner. Because if you're in a relationship and you want to be the winner, that's not going to be a healthy dynamic. So just as a practical tip, I invite you to try to take up this curiosity mindset the next time you're in a conflict and ask, what could be right for the other person right now? What could be true? And how can you validate their reality? Because most of the time in these conflicts, both parties are quote unquote right in their own reality, in their own view of the situation. And it's also important to have your own nervous system regulated or tools to regulate your own nervous system in these situations first. So doing the inner work is really important in order to be able to take on this mindset, in order to be kind of above it in that way, to be the bigger person. It requires some self-work, regulating your nervous system, calming your own nervous system first. So we're not in the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, sympathetic activated nervous system state. And I talked about this in detail on a previous podcast, if you want to find it, with lots of tips for regulating your nervous system. But some of the best ones I found: breath. Just breathing. A lot of times when we're getting upset, when we're getting heated in an argument, you can feel the heat rush up. Everything kind of moves up and the energy is moving up because your system is thinking it's getting ready for a fight. It's getting ready to defend itself. And so to remember to take our breath down, to breathe in deep, to bring the energy back down into your body instead of going up and out. And you might need a break. So something I talk a lot with parents about is taking a time out for yourself, a parent time out. And this works also in partnership too. And I have learned to do this with my husband. And it has just really, really changed things so much. To when I feel that energy coming up, when I feel like I want to attack, I take a breath and I say, you know what? I just need a little break to calm down and to give yourself that time to regulate your nervous system instead of letting the snowball start to happen, where you start to say things you can't take back and you start to behave in ways that are going to make the situation worse. So, in that situation, just walking away for a minute, doing something with your body to move that energy out, like, shaking your body or dancing it out or, going for a little walk, grounding, something that can get you regulated and back down. Your heart rate goes down. You can think more clearly. And then you can come back to the situation with a more clear mind, allowing those emotions to alchemize, allowing the anger to move through you. And so once you do that, even if you're working with someone who does not have that ability, who has not done those practices, you can then co-regulate. So co-regulation is helping the other person's nervous system find safety through your regulated nervous system. So through your calm presence, you can actually give the other party that same benefit without them actually even having to know that they're participating in that. And how that works is that the parasympathetic nervous system has safety cues. And so by bringing that calm presence, by being above it, you actually convey some of that benefit over to the other person. And so this works really, really good with kids. Like I was saying about the toddler having a tantrum. This is like such a good example because it's so salient. And any of us as mothers have been through this. And it's so easy when your kid is like, especially in public, embarrassing you, throwing a tantrum on the floor. So easy to take it personally and to allow that anger to just move up and like want to punish. But what works so much better is to regulate our own nervous system, to get ourselves calm, and then to get on their level and to just sit and be present, to be a calm presence, to hold that space for them, to allow their emotions, their tantrum to move through them. And this really changes everything. This changes the dynamic because instead of having this conflict, and we all know having a fight with a toddler is a losing game for everybody and tends to cause things to take, 10 times longer and just drawn out and creates so much chaos in the house. So just allowing them to sit with them for 60 to 90 seconds is scientifically how long it takes for an emotion to move through the body. So a minute to a minute and a half to allow those emotions to move and just to sit there and to be calm, to breathe with them, to be a steady presence can help that to alchemize that situation so much. And so there are some co-regulation techniques that I have learned. And this can work either if you have a willing participant, like let's say your husband, who is willing to engage in these practices with you. And especially if you've talked about them and practiced them ahead of time, bringing them up in a conflict can actually be such a good way to bridge because you can actually acknowledge like, hey, we're doing that thing again. Why don't we use some of our co-regulation tools and get back to baseline before we talk about this any further? And some of those techniques, like I said, if you have a willing participant who is able to regulate their own nervous system and get down there with you, are eye gazing. So literally just looking each other in the eyes without saying anything, with a soft, calm face. This isn't glaring stare down. A glaring stare down is a completely different energy. But to look into each other's eyes, to breathe calmly, facing each other for, again, if you can do this for about 60 seconds, that is enough time for those emotions to change, to alchemize, to go from being, hot and angry to relaxed and calm. And even I have found sometimes it turns things into a funny situation. Like the thing with the eggs, it's like, oh, that was really silly. Like we got into a fight. We both got so mad at each other over runny eggs. Like when you are able to calm down and get out of that fight or flight, you can actually look at something and realize the humor in it. And that's something I've noticed that eye gazing has done for me and my husband, where I particularly will start giggling. Try holding eye contact in that way for a whole minute. And I dare you to not get kind of silly about it. So another thing is breath synchronization. And so this is where you actually actively try to adopt the same breathing pattern. And a lot of this works just by really focusing our calm attention on each other. And so you can do this face to face, you can do it while you're eye gazing, or you can do it back to back, like sitting back to back with someone with your backs touching and trying to sync your breathing together. And this can co-regulate your nervous system in such a powerful way. And this, again, it's like hard to hold your anger and be mad at someone when you're doing these practices. It brings a lightness to the situation. Another really good co-regulation technique is physical touch. And so if you have a willing participant, again, doing hand holding, sitting across from each other, eye gazing, breath synchronization, and holding each other's hands, or just a hug. Like if both people are able to regulate themselves enough first to be open to the physical touch, like a heart to heart hug and extended, not just a little hug, but like I said, you need about a minute to a minute and a half to allow those emotions to change. And that is an extended hug. And again, it can feel a little silly, but it changes the situation. It changes the feeling of it so much and gets you to a place where you can really connect and then talk and discuss and work things out. This also works even if you have an unwilling participant. If you have a child, again, that's, in a tantrum, they're not a willing participant in the repair, in the co-regulation, but you can softly gaze at them. You can do the eye gazing, or even if it's your partner, just changing your attitude, your behavior, your reaction, your presence, your nervous system has such a big impact on the other person. They're not even aware of it. This isn't something that they're aware of, but you changing your energy and actively participating in this way changes the energy of the situation so much. So just giving the other party soft and steady eye contact, and then subtle breath syncing, without announcing it to them, without them even knowing. You follow their breath and try to slow it down. Then usually when you're upset, your breathing pattern goes up. Like I said, your heart rate goes up. And so trying to sync and then trying to actively bring yours down actually subconsciously makes them regulate. And we know this with babies, like babies sync to our breathing pattern and our heart rate. And that's well known, but this also works with anybody else. And again, the gentle physical touch, the physical contact, if the person is willing, if they're actively, pulling away, you don't want to force touch on them, obviously, but just a hand on the shoulder or the back can really convey that calming and caring and really help them to regulate their own nervous system. And some extra connection tools for these moments too is active listening. So hearing what they're saying and then reflecting it back with empathy and understanding. And so with a child, maybe you disagree with what they're feeling, or you think they shouldn't be feeling that way, or thinking or saying or doing whatever it is they're doing. But instead of bringing your judgment to that situation and telling them what they did wrong, you validate their emotions and you reflect it back. And so what this looks like is, let's say your toddler is having a tantrum because they wanted the lollipop in the store and you said no. And so they're throwing a fit and you say, wow, you are really, really upset that you didn't get that lollipop. I can see that you're really mad at me right now. You're having a lot of emotions about this lollipop, and it just reflecting that back to them, like, hey, you're really upset and that's okay. It doesn't mean you give in and you give them the lollipop. It just means you're acknowledging that that is a tough situation for them. And this works the same way with adult situations. You can, without having to say, I'm wrong and I'm bad, you can say, I understand where you're coming from. I see your point. I can see why that would upset you. I can understand why you would be mad right now. And this is just validating their emotions. This is just showing that you care and that you understand. And that can shift things so much. And another thing that can be helpful, which this is a stretch and more hard to do, but this is like advanced level stuff, is actually expressing appreciation and gratitude. Like, thank you for expressing yourself to me. Thank you for telling me how you feel. I appreciate you letting me know how mad you are in this situation. And when you first start doing this, it can feel awkward and even disingenuine, but as you shift your mindset and as you really rise above these situations and can stay, I don't want to say in control, because the point isn't to control your emotions. The point is to allow them to alchemize, to allow them to move through it and to understand them, to really understand them. Then you do get better at this. As you get better at regulating your own nervous system, as you get better at repair, then you actually can feel that gratitude and appreciation. Like, I would much rather have my kids or my partner tell me when they're mad at me, tell me when I've fucked up, than to hold it back, to simmer on it, to have resentment. It is so much more healthy for the other person to be able to express themselves. And I never want my kids or my partner or my friends to feel like they can't come to me and tell me when they're upset. And so once you have nervous systems regulated, once you have regulated and co-regulated, then that is really the time to go into that repair process, really into the more like higher functioning of repair, not as much on the emotional level, but really like repair on the cognitive level to be able to talk through things. And it's very important when you go into that repair process to get consent from the other person, and not to just bombard them with your ideas and opinions about the situation, because that can actually lead into more conflict or secondary conflict, or, carry that fight over, start it over. So getting consent to have those conversations, like maybe the other person's still too mad to talk about it. Like, asking them, when would you have the capacity to have a conversation about this situation? Like, maybe we can take a 15-minute break and we can come back and we can talk about this, because it really is important to then have that cognitive piece. And this is definitely more true for the older the person is. With little kids, a lot of times there is not so much processing that happens, but a little bit is still, really good. You might want to come back after the toddler has calmed down, and maybe after you've left the grocery store, and you say, hey, you got really upset about not getting that lollipop. And if they're in a space to talk about it, where it's not just going to trigger a whole meltdown again, say, mommy didn't want you to have that lollipop because we're about to go out to dinner and I didn't want you to ruin your appetite, or, whatever. Just to bring some closure to the situation. And of course, with adult conversations, this is definitely very important to do, because this is setting up to actually move beyond it, to come to understanding, so that these triggers don't just keep coming up over and over and over again. But like I said, it is very important to regulate yourself first before entering into these conversations, and to make sure that the other party has regulated enough to be capable of having these conversations too. So once you get consent and you're ready to talk about the problem, another thing that is really important is to use I statements, because we don't want to trigger the same conflict again. We don't want to trigger a secondary fight. So if you come at your partner and you're like, you made me feel this because you did this, that's again just putting them in the bad guy role and you in the good guy role, the victim and perpetrator, and it's starting that whole conflict again. And so it's important when you're going into repair to go into it with the mindset of coming together and repairing, and not with the mindset of, I'm going to prove to you how I was right and you are wrong. And that is so common. That is pretty much how we all operate, because that is how we have been trained since infancy, most of us, to communicate with people. Most of us are so stuck in this victimhood mentality, and this has just been really ingrained in the way we speak to people. And so I did a lot of work with nonviolent communication, and spent many, many years doing NVC trainings. And so one of the first things that you learn in that is the I statements. I feel, and a little script for this, the NVC script for this is like, when I saw, heard, whatever the situation, and this is an unbiased view of the situation. Let's say, let's go back to the eggs. So when you serve, when I was served a plate of runny eggs, right? I felt hurt and disappointed because I have a deep desire for you to know and understand my likes and preferences. And so this is a very vulnerable way to have a conversation with somebody. This is a very vulnerable way to share your side of the story. But this definitely will get you a lot further in repair than saying something like, you cooked my eggs wrong again, and you hurt my feelings, and you don't know me, which is more what we're used to, how we are used to communication. So this can be difficult at first. And it's taken me a long time, and I am still practicing even after like 15 years of studying nonviolent communication. It still doesn't completely come naturally because this is not how we were taught to speak. But using those I statements will really get you so much further with the other person seeing your side and understanding your feelings, your wants, and your needs. And so then on the other side of that, when the person tells you their feelings, their wants, their needs, it's really important to listen without interruption and to reflect back to them. And this can be very difficult when you're working with your partner if they are not doing the work, if they are not learning these communication skills. It can be very difficult to not fall back into that pattern and to get back into fighting. But it is, again, this is so life-changing. This is such like an up-leveling thing for your relationships to be able to master these skills. And so even if they are not using I statements, even if they are using you statements, well, you are unappreciative and you always do this. I know that's something we say all the time, right? You always, which is never true because nobody always. We get stuck in patterns. But to try to reflect back, again, unbiasedly, and say, I can see how you would be hurt by that. I can see how my reaction and my behavior upset you. And just to reflect back and to allow them to communicate their feelings without jumping in, without projecting, without interrupting. And this can be, again, this is like high level work, and this can be so hard. And it can also feel unfair at first. But I'm telling you, like, once you start doing this, the other person will pick up on it and it changes the dynamic. So when you start doing this work, and it won't be the first time, well, it might be the first time. It's unlikely to be the very first time, but after a while, you will notice the other person starts picking up on this and they start communicating in that way too. Especially like when you think about kids, they mirror and they mimic, and for better or for worse, they start saying and behaving and, doing the things that you do to them, right? So you will actually convey in the same way co-regulation can convey that calm and that collectedness to the other party. This kind of communication will actually start to rub off on the other party, and they will actually start to pick up on this as well. Because really, it's so relieving to have this kind of conversation. It feels good. It feels much better than being right, actually. And like I said, you can validate the other person's point of view without saying I'm wrong. This isn't about being a doormat. This isn't about, being, taking the blame for everything and saying, yeah, I'm just the bad guy in this situation. This isn't about that at all. You can validate the other person's reality, their experience, without losing yourself, your identity in the situation. And a really good tool for that is to just say, that makes sense. That can be so relieving for the other person to just feel understood. The other person is like, you pissed me off because you did blah, blah, blah. Obviously, we want to be triggered and to be like, well, fuck you, man. Like, you did that, and that's why I did that. But again, that's getting back into the conflict. And so if you just say, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense that they were mad. And it does from their point of view, from their reality, just like it makes sense for you in your reality, from your point of view, to be mad about whatever it is they did, said, etc. So after this, it is really good if you can agree on how to handle the situation the next time. If you can agree on how to do things differently in the future. And this isn't always possible. Sometimes, I mean, there have been certain issues that keep coming up and, for a decade have come up in my marriage that we just keep coming back to and we just keep coming back to, and we still haven't found a place of true agreement. And so it's not always possible, but in most situations, it is possible that you can agree to handle things differently. You can agree to find some kind of common ground in the situation. And so again, this is high level stuff, but after both parties have been heard and feel understood, if you can make an agreement, next time this situation happens, this is how we will handle it differently. In the case, like I said, about the undercooked eggs, agreeing that next time he will be mindful to make the eggs how I want it. And again, I laugh because it's such like a silly little thing, but it had such a profound impact in the moment on both of us it was just such a triggering thing. And it goes back to, like I said before, most of this is old wounding, not feeling seen, not feeling understood. The mind chatter that plays in that is he'll never understand me. He doesn't really love me. And that's, it seems dramatic, but that is what we do. We tie past baggage onto these little conflicts, and we bring that into the present where it doesn't actually really belong. And really to be able to just come back and say, hey, I really like my eggs this way. I would really appreciate it if you could just remember, it's really not that big of a deal, right? So another thing that can be really helpful is to both forgive and apologize. And again, this isn't always possible. We're not always in that space, but the more we can learn to do that, the more we can learn to forgive and apologize and come back and really complete that circle, the better. And I think especially with little kids, because our parents, most of us did not grow up with parents who practice this with us, forgiving and apologizing with your children so that we're creating generational healing and we are not passing these patterns forward so that when they're adults and they're having their adult relationships, they already have this trained into them as normal to normalize being able to apologize. So, I've on a regular basis apologized to my kids. I'm sorry, I was cranky and I snapped at you. That's not how I want to show up as a parent. And I just want you to know that I am sorry. And that isn't putting yourself in a lower position. And I feel like that's something that again, societally, we have been entrained to is that if you apologize, that means you're admitting that you're wrong and the other party is right. And that makes them above you. And that's just not true. So the more we can practice these skills, practice these skills with our children, talk to our kids about it, and normalize it, the better we'll all get at it too. And when we come into consciously parenting, consciously having relationships, consciously trying to repair in our marriages and our friendships and everything else, it can seem awkward at first. It can feel uncomfortable at first. But the more you practice these skills, and you can practice them in low stress times, you can practice them when there isn't a fight or a big conflict or a big blow up. Practice it when it is safe to practice it'll be easier and it'll feel more comfortable in the high stress times. Because when we are in those high stress conflicts, sometimes it can be hard to remember these skills. But if you can give yourself like micro timeouts, give yourself a nervous system reset, and then take that time to remember and actively come back to the situation, feeling regulated and feeling ready to have those conversations or engage in that kind of co-regulation, then it gets easier. It gets easier to actually bring it up in the middle of conflict and to actually halt conflict before it blows up, before it turns into a fight. So I would love to encourage everyone listening to pick one of these repair and co-regulation tools and to practice it. And if you have a willing participant like your partner, talk to them about it. Practice. Say, this is something that I would like to try to bring to our relationship. Practice the co-regulation, the eye gazing, the hand holding, the breath sinking. And again, you're probably going to break out into fits of giggles. That's my experience anyways, but to practice it. So when you have conflict, when you have something come up, the next time you have these tools in your back pocket, practiced and ready to use. And so it is my true hope that this podcast is going to leave you with some tools for your toolbox to build a more strong, healthy, loving relationship with your partner, with your family, and that you come away from this with some things to work on to really heal conflict, really learn how to repair. And if you need more support in this, this is something that I work with one-on-one with clients or with couples, and I would love to be there to support you. Always feel free to reach out if you have more questions, if you want a deeper dive. And until next time, I love you all. Goodbye.